Hello, thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see such a great turnout, and I'm hoping that you will take what you've learned today and think about ways to translate it into action to help support the project, the remarkable project that is Rojava. I have several connections with this project. Most recently, I'm the translator of a book that was written by a delegation that visited Rojava for a month in May 2014. They wrote it in German, and I need to be careful to say that I didn't translate it from Turkish, from German, and it's been published by Pluto Press. So part of what I'm doing here this week is doing book launches for this wonderful and extremely informative book. Another way I'm connected with Rojava is that I've been there twice myself. I've written as part of delegations to observe and witness. I've written about it in several places online, and you can find my work, my observations about it there. But my third connection is somewhat of a different order. It has to do with ideology, and that is my collaboration with this Murray Bookchin that some of you have heard about or may know about already. His ideas of social ecology were a great influence on the development of democratic confederalism, which is the basic ideological structure on which Rojava is based. So let me tell you, I thought I would tell you a little bit about how this route actually dates back long before I knew Bookchin, to the 1950s, to the Bronx in the United States in New York, in the era after World War II. Bookchin had been a communist, a member of the Stalinist movement, as he later called it, in the 30s, trying to create a proletarian revolution to overthrow capitalism, but was disappointed that that did not work out during World War II. Many of his comrades decided, upon the failure of the proletariat to make a revolution, to move to the right and to enter mainstream society and have a good life for themselves. But Bookchin couldn't do that because he considered capitalism to be a form of barbarism, and to accept capitalism is to accept barbarism, and that was intolerable. So he worked with a group of people to think out what were the new limits of capitalism. There has to be a limit because capitalism is an evil system, and if the limit is not the misery of the proletariat or the falling rate of, well, the different Marxist terms, I'm sorry, they're not on the tip of my tongue right now, then what are the limits of capitalism? He looked around and he saw many things about post-war American society. He saw that the American government had become very centralized and very powerful, partly as a result of the war. He saw that the economy was being turbocharged with capitalism, that giant enterprises were becoming larger and larger and swallowing up small enterprises. He saw that technology was turning people into robots, that instead of being the masters of technology, people were being almost reduced to arms of machines. And above all, he saw that agriculture was becoming industrialized. It was being reworked for the purposes of profit as part of the capitalist system. And in the process of that, small-scale farming had given way to large industrialized tracts that, above all, relied on chemicals for all sorts of reasons, for pesticides and food and preservatives and herbicides. And these were toxic to health. Now, the evil twin, as I like to think of it, of the industrialized agriculture system that he was criticizing is the megalopolis, the giant city. Cities, too, in parallel with this, the gigantic agriculture, were themselves becoming gigantic. They were being choked with cars. They were being crowded with people. They were spewing out pollution of both the air and the waterways. And again, reducing people to automatons who went into routine jobs in their daily life and stripping them of their power, their potential power as political beings. The megalopolis was rendering them passive, and the state epitomizes the political dimension of this process. So in all these ways, he developed a program for decentralization. He wanted to decentralize agriculture. He wanted to decentralize the cities and marry them in a vision of town and country that are united on a small scale so that food is produced near where it's consumed. He wanted to decentralize technology because he wasn't a primitivist, But these new technologies of miniaturization and cybernation and even computers were coming in, and he thought that these could lend themselves to a small-scale manufacturing rather than these gigantic industrial facilities that were coming up. He thought energy needed to be decentralized because look what was coming in, nuclear power, and fossil fuels, which were contributing to this large scale of industry and the cities. And so he thought that, let's see, technology, so the economy had to be decentralized as well. He had some ideas about that he later called the municipalization of the economy. But above all, the most important piece for what we're describing here, I think, is the political decentralization. He thought that we needed to be institutions, that it wasn't enough to destroy the state, as anarchists were calling for. There needed to be institutions that could embody freedom, that could create freedom, because if you just have a free-for-all, then somebody is going to fight and become dominant and will end up with a dictatorship again. So freedom, he said, has its forms. It has to be, you have to have institutions that guarantee equality with people and that guarantee that everyone has rights. And he looked to ancient Athens, he looked throughout history and found different models for rare places in history where this had been embodied. Ancient Athens, the New England Town Meeting, tribal societies. There were some assemblies in the French Revolution in the 1790s that he was very interested in. But they all were besmirched in some ways by history. It was very easy for people to laugh and say, oh, face-to-face democracy, citizens' assemblies, those things can never work, Why, look at ancient Athens. It was built on slavery and excluded women, and it was imperialist. I mean, look at those New England town meetings in the early America. They were involved with waging wars against Indians, and plus they were religious fanatics. And as for the French Revolution, there was a lot of blood involved. But what Bookchin said was essentially, look, all those things, the defects, historical defects, are not inherent to the institutions themselves, to that idea of a citizens' assembly. Instead of looking for reasons not to do it, not to create them because, women might be excluded, let's start with the idea that this is a way to make politics ethical, to include everyone so that everyone can make decisions together about their own community life. Let's start with the premise that it's ethical and then work out the problems from there instead of excluding it from the outset. Another objection that was often raised, though, was, well, we have a very complex society. We have, the ancient Athens was very, very small scale. Paris, that was a big city in the 1790s, but still, much smaller than cities today. Well, his answer to this problem was confederation, that the citizens' assemblies that would be created as the vested citizen-empowered government of localities, self-government, would work together in confederation. And he took the structure from the anarchists of the CNT and the Spanish Revolution and other parts of anarchist history. There's a series, they worked in a series of tiers so that power could flow from the bottom up, so that the delegates would be mandated from the base level of the assemblies up to a coordinating council and maybe up to another one and up to another one, so that decisions could be made and administration could happen over broad areas, and yet power would flow from the bottom up. That was the all-important thing, because he was an anarchist by this time. The reason for he thought that this state was reducing people to passive non-entities. He wanted people to be active citizens. He wanted them to take charge of their own lives. And look, also, it's this human health issue continued to be very important because pollution was wrecking the environment and making the biosphere impossible for people to live in. So those two things for him went together. So these ideas became known as were called by different names. If you don't mind me laying on some ideology here to you, eco-anarchism, social ecology, communalism, Libertarian municipalism is the specific name for this idea of the political dimension of the communes and councils in confederation. And he thought that this could become a counterpower to the nation state. If that the people would see that they can govern their own lives, they could make decisions that could turn society around so it wasn't destroying the biosphere, and they would when enough people participated in the citizens' assemblies and in the confederations, it would form a dual power to the nation state and could be overthrown. Before I go on, I just want to say a little bit about this economic decentralization. For me, that's the heart of his study of early society, what he called organic society, where people lived in tribal society, operating according to what Marx called primitive communism, but Bookchin used different words, which I think are very useful. Usufruct, production for use, using things just as you need them, but sharing the rest. The ethic of complementarity, where people of different abilities take care of each other and look out for each other. The irreducible minimum. I love this concept. It almost sounds like the guaranteed basic income, right? I mean, the irreducible minimum means everybody is taken care of. It means, and above all, it means the community takes care of everybody. That Social Security lies in community, not in each individual person going out and fighting for him or herself and, perpetuating the profit system. Well, he spent decades trying to advocate these ideas, and while he did develop some comrades along these lines, I joined him in 1987. A large movement to undertake this didn't materialize. I'll just point out one. If you want to know more about libertarian municipalism and this political project, at his behest, I wrote this little book called The Politics of Social Ecology, Libertarian Municipalism, in 1997 or 98, something like that. It's published by Black Rose Books, and it's been translated into several languages. We decided at one point that we needed a primer. So, as I said, it didn't really take off in the United States, but as we've all come to realize now, a Turkish translation became very important, several Turkish translations. They were read by Abdullah Öcalan in İmralı prison between 2000, 2002 or 2003. I think especially this book on urbanism, these political ideas were very important to him, libertarian municipalism. By 2002, he was recommending them to the Havals, to the friends in the PKK, and at this time the PKK was undergoing an ideological transformation away from the demand for a separate Kurdish state, which had been part of its founding manifesto in 1978, a separate Kurdish state created along sort of Marxist, or worked for along Marxist-Leninist lines. Instead, they would give up the idea of a state and try to create this bottom-up polity with councils and communes and councils in confederation. This was certainly not Bookchin's influence was certainly not the only one. He read many books on democracy, I'm sure, in prison, and there's also, you can look at ancient Athens for ancient models of assembly democracy, but they also existed in Mesopotamia. So, but he did put it together, and Bookchin did have some importance. In fact, when some intermediaries wrote to him, we were living together at the time, one morning on my inbox, I see a request for a dialogue, and at some point during that sort of mediated conversation, Öcalan said through translators and lawyers and to Bookchin that he was he considered himself a social ecologist and a very good student of Bookchin. So we know that there was some influence. In any case, after Bookchin died, in 2006, the PKK assembly swore that they would be the first place to create a Bookchin polity on the planet. And it turned out that they, as I think Ercan will go into in a little more detail, a conscientious effort had been made to think out the best ideology and then to implement it, to put it in practice. They weren't just tinkering. They discussed it first and then decided that democratic confederalism is the best approach for all sorts of reasons and would put it into practice. Just before, one more thing before I have to give up my microphone here. I have found that in my travels to Rojava and in reading about all this, it's a good way to approach understanding the phenomenon is through this basic rejection of the state in all its forms. In the Middle East, it's for the heterogeneous peoples that live there, for that incredibly polyglot area. The state has been a force for repression, for denial of identity, and ultimately also for massacres and even genocide. So this unitary state that insists in Turkey, that insists that everyone that lives in Turkey is a Turk and everyone that lives in Syria is an Arab. This overrides ethnicity, ethnic and religious differences. When I was in Rojava, I met a woman called Nilüfer Koç who said, you know, it's ethnic warfare and religious warfare. These are divisions created by the state. If there wasn't the state pitting people against each other, we could all live together in peace. And I think that's one of the basic principles of the Kurdish movement. It's embodied in their constitution. So you see in Rojava a transfer of basic the organizing functions of the state into society, into a stateless society. So instead of a constitution, which they associate with the state, they have a social contract or a charter. And it contains, it's not just a change in language, it's full of all sorts of human rights affirmations and affirmations on the liberation of women and on ethnicities. It doesn't even use the word Rojava, as Ercan has pointed out, because that's a Kurdish word. Everyone's to be included. Other ways, they don't have police, because police serve the state. They have asayish, egalitarian defense forces that defend the society. They don't have an army. That's associated with the state. They have the YPG and the YPJ, the People's Protection Units. You can see just from that language that it's about supporting, these units militias are to support the society and not the state. There's a transfer of land. I think as someone mentioned earlier, a lot of land was left behind after the Syrian regime left. And it's been turned not into corporate enterprises bolstered by a state, but into cooperatives, embodying, especially agrarian cooperatives, embodying these principles that I think you could call them the irreducible minimum, the ethic of complementarity and usufruct. These are principles by which people work together and make decisions and organize a cooperative in an egalitarian way and look after each other. The education system is not they don't use when I was there, they didn't use the word university because they associate university with the state. Instead, they have academies, which are institutions for popular education, not just for students between a certain age, but for students of all ages, up to even people who are in their 80s and 90s. Go to the academies for popular education, and there's no unidirectional flow of education from teacher to student. It's a mutual process of mutual discussion. I think that's one reason they're so committed to their ideas, is because they've discussed them and discussed all the possibilities so thoroughly until an agreement is reached that this is the way to go forward. What else? Oh, I had some other ways I wanted to mention in which functions are transferred from the state to society, but I think I'm running out of steam now. So I'm going to turn it over to Ercan, and we can talk about it more during the question period. So.